Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 117. I'm Enigmius and today we're building a new small vessel. We're not going to build the whole thing in one episode, but we're going to start and we're going to do something similar to what we've done in the past, but a little bit different and hopefully a little bit better. You're seeing the normal method that I have for starting a ship is we build it on a platform that we've built, and then on top of that platform we build a little pillar, in this case out of concrete blocks, and then we put the starter block on top of that, and then we build supports for that starter block, and that way we're able to put the core roughly where we want it relative to its position in the finished ship. So that's one key detail it's important to mention now. The other thing that you might have noticed already is that the playback speed for this specific video is quite a bit faster than I normally do for build videos, which is already twice the normal speed. So this is 4 times the normal speed, and the reason why I'm going a little bit faster for this one is that we're using exclusively cubes for this episode. All we're doing is putting a bunch of different profiles together to give you an idea of what the ship is going to look like, and they're also going to act as guides for the design of the ship as we go in terms of building it and putting it together according to a specific shape. In this context, where it's just cubes coming together, I think it's justified to have things a little bit faster, just to kind of keep things moving along. The goal isn't to take a look at how the different blocks are coming together and interacting with one another because they're all cubes. It's just to see what the process was and what we end up with all the different profiles that are coming together. So you saw the first thing that we did was the large side profile of the entire ship. Once we got the core, the starter block in place with its supports, we did that large side profile, and then we just put that kind of curving section on the front. That's kind of marking the front section of the ship and the way that that particular area of the ship will hopefully come together. And then from here, it's just looking at all the different areas of the ship, the key specific noteworthy areas of the ship that stand out from the areas around them, and putting the profiles into place so that we can look back on it before we get carried away with the actual design and all the time-consuming stuff and decide if we're happy with the way that it looks or if we want to make changes. Setting it up this way, sort of prototyping with just cubes and profiles, saves a huge amount of time in my builds when the builds are fairly complicated, because we can see without a ton of effort how things are coming together. You can see here as an example, I'm trying to put an elliptical profile here at a basically perpendicular to the main profile that we already set up. In order to do this, there are 2 criteria that I have for whether or not I'm happy with the shape that I come up with. First of all, if it's large enough relative to the scale of the ship and how everything else is going to come together, and then also if the shape of the ellipse is something that I'm happy with. And you can see it's a fairly reasonable half elliptical shape, but it's very small relative to what I had in mind. So now, having not spent a ton of time putting that original ellipse into place, we can also spend not a ton of time putting a larger ellipse into place so that we can compare the two and decide if we're headed in the right direction with the size and the scale and having everything come together. And then once we get that basically satisfied, we can look at the overall shape. And what I'm finding is that it's a little bit too narrow. It's starting to curve a little bit too soon, and it comes together to too sharp of a point at the outmost areas of this ellipse. So again, we put it together very quickly. We can modify it very quickly. We get something in place that we're happy with, and then we can move on, having only spent minutes basically setting up this whole large section of the ship. And you can see now it's almost twice the size of the original shape we had into place. It's a little bit fatter than the second shape that we had into place. And now that it's done, of course, we can duplicate it over on the other side. And when it's done, we'll be able to take a step back and take a look at it and say, okay, is that what I had in mind? Or is something amiss? Do we have to go back and start reworking things again? So much quicker and easier to do it this way than it is to try and build out entire sections of the ship and then come back and realize that we're not happy with it because something that we could have corrected quickly and easily earlier on in the process. So that ellipse is good. I'm happy with that. We can move on from it. The idea here now is I wanted to kind of put together the rear profile of the ship, and basically whatever we come up with here is going to have to transition to that ellipse, but it's also going to help define this back section of the ship, which is fairly important. Once we get sort of a general idea of how everything is going to come together, one of the first things that I want to do is start putting in the big thrusters, the big small vessel thrusters that were added, not necessarily recently, but we've been busy with other things, so we haven't had a chance to play with them. Once we get those into place, it's going to be kind of important to make sure that the other areas that we're planning around the areas where the thrusters are housed don't interfere with that. So normally I kind of leave thrusters and stuff like that for in the middle section of the build. In this case, some of them are going to be going in very, very early in the process to make sure that they have enough space and that they, again, scale well with the rest of the build. Now this smaller ellipse that I just put into place is sort of indicating the size of the central section of the ship. If you imagine, we've got this big sort of wide back section of the ship, and then we've got a fairly robust but nevertheless smaller central section of the ship that's kind of tube-like leading to the front section, and that's defined by that ellipse that we just put into place. And now I'm looking at just a curve that's going to be a part of the way the elliptical section merges with that tube. It's really difficult for me to describe it now. It's probably going to be one of those things where I hope I can pull it off so that I can show it to you guys when we get that particular section of the ship built. But these are also very important curves that we're putting into place that are going to define key elements of the design going forward and towards the completed version. And now we're just kind of making sure that everything comes together. I made a mistake when I was doing the layout on this side, and the end result is that it didn't line up the way that it was supposed to with what was going on the other side. But again, because it's just the profile, it's very, very easy to correct. And what we're left with is a ship that's already starting to look like a ship. Just sitting on the deck here, profiles coming together. If you kind of connect them in your mind, it's starting to look like a ship that's worth building. I'm pretty excited about it, just the way it's coming together now. Obviously, there's more profiles and stuff that we have to finish. It won't take much longer. This episode is just a couple minutes more. I've already thought of a couple of things that I want to add before I move forward with the build itself, and we'll probably showcase those at the beginning of the next episode so that you can see those before we start making a mess elsewhere. But one of the things that I kind of realized as we were putting this all together is that the ship was dancing around a lot on this platform, and it's kind of off-putting because I'm always afraid. I've shown videos in the past where an entire capital vessel does like cartwheels across the landscape because something happened and it decided to misbehave with the physics engine, and I'm always a little bit concerned about these kinds of structures that I built that I'm happy with, but that start jittering around a bit, that finally they're just going to have enough and go flying off into the atmosphere. So we put another elliptical section over the front area of the ship that helps continue to define the shape and how everything's going to come together. And then I realized that I would be much happier if this thing had some landing gears instead of just sitting on the blocks in the position that they're in. So it's pretty easy to put the landing gears on the sides, and these will probably be pretty close to their finished positions, if not their finished positions. But trying to get the front landing gear in place was not easy when the ship is tilted ever so slightly forward. So what I decided to do, rather than mess around and make my life miserable, was build a counterweight on the back of the ship. And that basically involved just building a structure off the back of the ship and then just filling it out with square upon square of blocks. You can see here, adding weight to the back, and eventually, with enough weight and the right circumstances, the same mechanics that make the ship jitter and dance all over the place will make it tilt back. And then by removing a couple of key blocks, now the front end of the ship is tilted up. It's not only level, it's above where we need it in order to get these landing gears on it and continue forward with the build with the landing gears where we want, and we get rid of the counterweight. So the next episode, like I say, we'll show probably a few more profiles, things that I've added, and then we'll get into the build itself, and it's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a hell of a build. So if you want to be notified about the next episode and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. I'll just let you watch the rest. We're going to finish removing our counterweight, and then we're going to add a couple more elements before we call it an episode, and you'll have an opportunity to see from a wider angle what the finished product of this episode winds up being. I think it's kind of cool. I'm pretty happy with it. So thanks for watching, guys, and take care.